Long before Rome ruled the world, it was only a scatter of mud brick huts, clinging to the river's edge like a fragile dream waiting to awaken. Nothing about this place promised greatness, yet within its silence, something ancient and stubborn refused to die. Every legend begins with struggle, and Rome's began under the weight of a king whose shadow grew heavier than the crown he wore. If you stay with me, you'll see how this small rebellion would ignite the rise of a force the world had never seen. Tarquinius the Proud, Rome's final king, ruled through fear. But fear, like any weak stone, breaks when enough hands push against it. Rome rose not through glory, but through refusal. A refusal to bow, to suffer, to be silent. From that anger came an idea more powerful than any throne. A republic, born not from one man, but from every citizen willing to defend it. The Senate took shape. Elders chosen not for crowns, but for counsel. Their voices would steer Rome for centuries. Instead of one king, Rome elected 2 consuls each year, commanders bound by duty, not blood. Discipline became Rome's spine. Order was no longer demanded, it was practiced. The legion was no army of heroes, but of ordinary men who trained until unity became instinct. As discipline sharpened, so did ambition. Rome stepped beyond her hills, daring to claim the lands that threatened her future. Markets swelled, workshops roared, and temples climbed upward. Rome breathed like a growing giant. Rome discovered a truth older than any king. Laws endure longer than the men who write them. From rebellion rose resolve. Rome was no longer a frightened village. It was an idea, disciplined, determined, and impossible to ignore. Order became Rome's strongest weapon. Streets were mapped, markets aligned, and temples placed where the city's heartbeat was strongest. With each stone lifted, Rome declared her intention, not to survive, but to last. Roads stretched outward like veins, carrying Rome's will into lands that barely knew her name. In hidden workshops, iron sang, tools, blades, and armor, each piece crafted to endure as long as Rome itself. The legion was not built by strength alone. It was shaped by discipline, repeated until the body obeyed without thought. A Roman soldier learned early, the shield protects the man beside you, or Rome falls. What Rome lacked in age, she made up for in belief. Belief that a city could be held together not by kings, but by its people. In open gatherings, citizens cast their votes, a small act that carried the weight of an entire republic. Rome thrived because every hand had purpose. Carpenters, potters, bakers, all feeding the growing giant. Markets filled with life, spices from afar, fabrics from neighbors, and voices blending into the rhythm of a rising power. Rome borrowed from those she conquered, gods, tools, ideas, and forged them into something unmistakably Roman. What set Rome apart was not her army, but her unity. Citizens stood as one, for the Republic was theirs to defend. And because all great dreams invite danger, Rome raised walls, not to hide behind, but to mark where her future would begin. When neighboring tribes tested Rome's resolve, they found a people who fought not for conquest, but for survival. Rome had risen from rebellion into a disciplined republic, but this was only the beginning. As we continue, you'll see how this young city turns its ambition outward and steps onto the path that will reshape the ancient world. As confidence grew, Rome looked beyond her borders. What began as survival now stirred into ambition. Neighboring tribes challenged Rome's rise, yet each clash only sharpened her resolve and expanded her reach. Where Rome conquered, she built roads, bridges, and posts of stone, signatures of an order that arrived to stay. A Roman road was more than a path. It was a promise that Rome's influence would never fade. Her armies marched farther because Rome mastered what others overlooked: supply, precision, and relentless preparation. Each campaign refined the legion. Armor improved, formations evolved, and discipline hardened into something unbreakable. Every victory drew Rome's people closer. A republic united, not by kings, but by shared triumph. Rome became more than a city. It became an identity, one shaped by law, duty, and an unspoken belief that Rome was destined for more. Temples rose as testaments to Rome's spirit, structures built not only for gods, but for the people who believed in them. In the Forum, decisions shaped the fate of regions. Rome governed, not with chaos, but with careful debate. Not every victory came from war. Rome bargained, negotiated, and persuaded, choosing strategy over force when it served her best. Rome adapted quickly, absorbing cultures, techniques, and wisdom, turning every encounter into strength. Hills turned to borders, and borders turned to claims. Rome was no longer rising, she was expanding. Trade routes grew busier, caravans traveled safer. Wherever Rome touched, stability followed, sometimes welcomed, sometimes feared. Rome had mastered order, discipline, and expansion, but greatness carries a shadow, and soon the Republic would face challenges far greater than distant tribes. Rome no longer defended her borders, she reshaped them. Each campaign carried the Republic farther than the one before. The steady march of the legion became the pulse of Rome, measured, relentless, unmistakable. Small victories grew into triumphs. Rome's enemies learned a truth they had long ignored. Discipline outlasts brute strength. And with victory came spoils, grain, metals, livestock, resources that fueled the Republic's unstoppable growth. Rome ruled, not just with force, but with administration, organizing conquered lands with a precision new to the ancient world. Bridges rose, aqueducts stretched, and engineering became a quiet weapon, one that conquered more than armies ever could. A Roman soldier lived by a code: protect, obey, endure. In their unity, Rome found her edge. Every enemy taught Rome something new. Tactics shifted, weapons evolved, and Rome never met a lesson she did not use. Rome did not erase cultures, she absorbed them. Each people added a thread to the fabric of a growing republic. Road by road, Rome tied the ancient world together, creating paths that would outlive the men who built them. As Rome expanded, her neighbors became fewer and more wary. To protect what she gained, Rome strengthened her borders, building outposts where danger often came without warning. Inside the walls, life quickened. The Republic pulsed with trade, movement, and the energy of a city rising toward destiny. Rome's strength came not from any single man, but from the unity of a people who believed their future was shared. Rome was rising fast, but the more she grew, the more she hungered, and ambition has a price. As we continue, you'll see how victory begins to bend a great republic toward shadows it never meant to face. Victory brought wealth, more than the Republic had ever seen. And with wealth came the slow shift from discipline to desire. Simple homes became displays of status. Marble replaced wood. Gold replaced clay. Rome was changing, and not quietly. The gap widened, the rich climbed higher, and the poor fell further into the shadows of the very monuments they built. Rome kept expanding, but each victory demanded men. Men taken from farms, leaving families to struggle alone. For the common citizen, war no longer felt like glory. It felt like absence and debt. As wealth pooled at the top, Rome's streets filled with those who had nowhere else to go. In the Senate, comfort softened caution. Power tasted sweeter, and compromise came slowly. Influence became a currency. Favors were traded, laws bent, and the Republic's foundations trembled, quietly, almost politely. Soldiers returned not as citizens, but as men hardened by conquest. Unsure where they belonged, in a city that had moved on without them. New luxuries poured in from conquered lands. Silks, spices, philosophies. Each one changing Rome more than she realized. The old Roman virtues, simplicity, duty, restraint, began to fade beneath the shine of comfort. Ambition, once Rome's greatest strength, now stirred in dangerous ways. Not for the Republic, but for individual power. The Republic, so strong outwardly, began to fracture within. Political rivals formed factions, and suspicion replaced unity. Whispers spread across the city of betrayal, of ambition, of the possibility that Rome's next enemy might be Rome itself. Rome had tasted wealth, power, and glory, but beneath it all, cracks were spreading. As we continue, you'll see how these shadows grow until even the strongest republic begins to question its soul. Rome grew larger, but her unity grew thinner. The Republic had laws for everything, except the ambitions rising inside men's hearts. Taxes climbed, wages fell, and the weight of Rome's successes fell heaviest on those who had the least. To quiet unrest, leaders offered bread and spectacle, hoping noise would drown the growing discontent. Bloodsport became entertainment. What once horrified Rome now thrilled her. But every spectacle demanded coin, and coin demanded compromise. Rome paid for her distractions in ways she did not yet see. Power once shared began to concentrate. A few voices grew louder, while many voices faded. Even the legions felt the tension, sworn to Rome, yet pulled by loyalties to commanders who promised more. Senators no longer debated ideas. They fought for influence, forming factions that carved deep wounds into the Republic. In the lower districts, whispers grew louder. Whispers that perhaps the Republic no longer served the people who built it. Veterans returned home to find their land taken, their families struggling, and their service rewarded with empty promises. Rome grew strong on discipline, but now imbalance spread like cracks in marble, quiet but unstoppable. It began with small clashes, arguments, accusations, but the seeds of something far darker had already been planted. Injustice, once rare, became routine, and routine, once accepted, reshapes a nation more than any war. Rome had been founded on unity and discipline, but now the Republic began to forget the virtues that once made her unbreakable. Rome had risen higher than ever, yet she now stood on uneasy ground. And as we continue, you'll see how these fractures widen, pulling the Republic toward a conflict that will redefine its very future. Rome stood vast and dazzling, but the wider her borders stretched, the harder they became to hold. Rome's enemies were no longer nameless tribes. They watched, learned, and adapted, just as Rome once did. Battles flared on multiple frontiers. Each new war pulled soldiers farther from home and stretched Rome's strength thinner and thinner. Victory still came, but at a cost. Fewer returned, and those who did carried scars the city could not see. Strong men rose from the chaos, commanders who promised order in exchange for power Rome once swore no man would hold. What began as a republic now bent toward empire, one man at the center, surrounded by symbols of glory and fear. For the people in Rome's crowded streets, little felt stable anymore. Prices rose, rumors spread, and trust faded. In the corridors of power, daggers sharpened in the dark. When power narrows to one man, every rival becomes desperate. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession. Some killed in battle, others betrayed in rooms they thought were safe. Even the legions split, some loyal to Rome, others to the generals who paid them. The shield that once protected the empire now fractured. While Rome fought itself, her borders weakened. The walls that once felt eternal now seemed thin against the gathering storm. In the provinces, cities felt abandoned, roads crumbled, patrols came late, and the promise of Roman protection began to crack. Decline doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly through neglect, exhaustion, and choices made too late. There were voices who warned that Rome was drifting away from the virtues that once made her strong. But wisdom is easy to ignore when comfort still remains. Rome's story offers a warning for every age. Power is not destroyed in a single moment. It erodes when a people forget the values that built their strength. The Romans themselves understood it. A city is only as strong as the character of those who lead it, and those who follow. New enemies rose along Rome's borders, fierce, organized, and unafraid of the empire that once made the world tremble. These were not raids. They were storms, waves of warriors testing Rome's fading strength. For decades, the legions had marched without rest. Now Rome asked them to do the impossible, defend everywhere at once. Loyalty grew fragile. Hungry soldiers looked not to Rome, but to the commanders who fed them. In distant provinces, patience snapped. Towns rebelled against taxes, delays, and a Rome that no longer felt present. Rome dispatched what forces she had left. Small detachments meant to calm storms far too large. Messages traveled slowly. By the time word reached Rome, crises had already changed shape. The Senate argued while the world shifted. Action came late, consensus even later. In Rome's crowded streets, faith in the Republic crumbled. Fear spreads fastest when answers come slowly. Then came the moment Rome dreaded. Enemy bands crossed the borders, not as raiders, but as nations seeking new lands. The empire's frontier walls, once symbols of eternal strength, now shook under the weight of relentless pressure. Rumors raced through Rome faster than truth. The capital felt the tremors long before the enemy ever reached its gates. In desperate times, people look for leaders. But Rome's leaders looked only at each other, wondering who would act first and who would fall first. Even the city's heartbeat seemed slower. Fires burned low, streets emptied early. Rome was still mighty, but she no longer felt invincible. Rome now stood at a crossroads, pressed from without, weakened from within. And as we continue, you'll see how these pressures converge. pulling the empire toward the moment history will never forget. Rome had survived enemies for centuries, but the enemy now came from within. The fractures that once whispered now roared. The people were weary of taxes, of hunger, of promises that never reached their doors. Rome had stretched itself across continents, but an empire too large to understand is an empire too large to save. As Rome argued, her enemies advanced. For the first time in centuries, the wolves stood at her gates. No single blow destroyed Rome. It was the weight of 1,000 small mistakes, stacked across generations. Legions marched once more, not with the confidence of old, but with the heavy silence of men who sensed the end. When the walls finally broke, Rome did not fall in fire alone. She fell in disbelief. By sunrise, the city that once ruled the world stood silent, its streets broken, its pride scattered like dust. Rome's walls fell last. Long before stone collapsed, character had crumbled. Yet even in ruin, Rome gifted the world something greater than empire, ideas that outlived her armies. Her roads became the world's roads. Her laws shaped nations. Her language built empires long after hers had vanished. Rome teaches us this: greatness is fragile. It is lost not when enemies rise, but when a people forget what made them strong. Strength does not begin on the battlefield. It begins inside homes, inside laws, inside the character of a nation. Rome reminds the world that no empire lasts forever, but wisdom does. And so the story of Rome ends, yet its lessons travel forward, carried by every civilization that dares to rise. When the storms faded, only dust remained, resting gently on a world that had once refused to kneel. In the silence, echoes lingered, memories of triumphs, of victories, of a greatness that once reshaped the world. But the world did not end with Rome. It simply moved on, carrying pieces of her in every step forward. Her ruins became lessons, etched into stone, waiting for new civilizations to read them. Power fades, glory fades, but wisdom endures. Look closely, and Rome still walks beside us, in our laws, our languages, our cities, our ideas. Every nation sees itself in Rome, its rise, its strength, its struggles, and the quiet dangers that grow in times of comfort. Rome warns us, no empire falls in a single night. Decline begins in the mind long before it appears in the world. But understanding the past gives us strength. Rome's mistakes become our guidance. Her collapse becomes our caution. For though Rome fell, the flame she lit never went out. It traveled through centuries, igniting minds across the world. What Rome leaves behind is not sorrow, but perspective. A reminder that greatness is built every day, decision by decision, heart by heart. Every person, every nation, every era faces the choice Rome once did: to rise through discipline or fall through neglect. Rome may be gone, but her echo endures. A whisper reminding humanity to remember, to learn, to build wisely. This is Rome's gift to us, a story of rise and fall, of glory and consequence, of how even the greatest must guard the values that lift them. Thank you for walking through history with us. If this journey into ancient Rome moved you, your support helps keep these stories alive, so together we may continue exploring the past and bringing forgotten worlds back to life.